Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Stephen Peinecker, and this is a interview 3 years in the making. This is the weekend. It is October 25th, 2024, and approximately 3 years ago, I ran into this gentleman at the Book of Mormon Expo put on by Rod Meldrum. And this weekend, they are doing another one, and I thought it's appropriate that we come full circle 3 years later. When I first met Kevin Kraut, the son of Ogden Kraut, one of the most important, influential voices in Mormon fundamentalism. Kevin, welcome to the program.
Well, glad to be here. This is interesting.
And you're a very interesting person. And of course, I've had Ann Wild on to talk about the legacy of Ogden Kraut. And we're going to have you back on, Kevin, to kind of talk about your father, his legacy, and what you're doing, and some other interesting stories about like the three Nephites and everything like that. But one of the reasons I actually wanted you to come on the program was to talk about Bishop Koyle's dream mine. And we're going to talk about that. But before we do that, I actually want to share a couple things with the audience here. So just give me 1 second. Let's see here. There we go. So Kevin is a really interesting person. First of all, he is in charge of the Old Pioneer Press, and this is their website. And I'm going to leave links in the description, and we're going to probably be referencing this website. He also has a YouTube channel called Kevin Kraut. I first came across Kevin when he was on another YouTube channel called Don Quixote, and a lot of those videos and interviews have been transferred over onto this channel. But he deals with LDS, Mormon LDS folklore stories, and it's just an interesting place and an interesting channel, and he's got interesting stories to tell. And then one other website, again, I will have these in the description, is actually all things Ogden Kraut, ogdenkraut.com, that's his father. So here we go. Check those out. Make sure you are subscribed. And let's see. Oh, I am subscribed to Kevin Kraut's channel already. So make sure that you get subscribed to it as well. So yes, so Mormon folklore and LDS folklore. And I think it's so interesting because of course, when I first met you 3 years ago, you had told me about some three Nephite stories that you had encountered. And again, we'll have you back on to talk about those. And also your experiences with Ezra Taft Benson, which is really another fascinating story. Maybe we'll touch on that a little bit today. But I really wanted to start with before we actually talk about the Dream Mine, Kevin, I just want you to maybe give a little background about yourself so people get a bit better understanding of who you are.
Okay, well, my father he worked for the federal government and he worked at Dugway Proving Grounds. I was born there. My father had a photographic memory and he was also a photographer. Uh, there was famous stories where they got in and had him take pictures and secret pictures, and then they got back and the photography didn't work. And then he goes, well, what did you need? Did you just need the information? And they said, sure. And so he sat down at his typewriter and because he had a photographic memory, just retyped everything that he saw. And he only had glanced at it once or twice. And so I watched my father, people would come up and say, well, where is that in Mormon history? And he would sit there and he'd go, okay, hang on just a sec. And then he'd give verse, books, where exactly it was. Um, there's a reason why I'm telling about my father and his experiences here because it helped form me. But what happened was that one time he went into the archives of the LDS church and they grabbed him and pulled him. Uh-oh, what did I write wrong now? And they laughed and they go, no, 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 no. We've just been waiting for you. We're trying to find, and I believe it was called the Red Fox Prophecy. And we can't find it. The general authorities have been asking us for years. No scholar knows anywhere where this is. And my dad said, here, let me just go through my little computer bank here and see if I can find it. And so he sat down for about 10 or 15 minutes, closed his eyes, and then he came back and he goes, okay, I got it. It's a lady named this. She did a thesis at the University of Utah. It's on page like 338 on the bottom of the page, right hand side, and that gives the reference to the Red Fox prophecy. And it blew him out of the water. And and so having grown up with those kind of people, and Dugway was all the smartest scientists of all of the armed forces would go to Dugway Proving Ground. I grew up with some of the brightest, most brilliant kids ever, and I thought I was just dumb. I thought because I was at the bottom of the class. And but in all of that, my dad, he knew Hugh Nibley very well,
Hmm.
and Cleon Skousen came to our house all the time. Scholars, BYU, I could name tons of scholars. They called the house. They visited. We so I grew up around some of the really high profile names of the LDS Church, and actually knew a lot of these people and asking questions as a young man. That helped kind of change my life and answer things of deep nature. One time I was with Hugh, and he says, "Well, you just keep going deeper, don't you?" You know, I said, "Yeah, I just nobody's ever answered my questions, and so those were parts of my upbringing. Um, I was raised in the LDS Church. My mother stayed in the church. My father eventually went off into fundamentalist world and did his thing. He got excommunicated by Marky Peterson, who did eventually excommunicate Bishop Koyle as well. And so I served a mission in New Zealand and walked some beautiful paths where Matthew Cowley walked, and I heard his lecture that was on miracles, and I knelt down and said, "I want to go to a place just like this." And I got called exactly where Matthew Kelly walked. And I have a YouTube on that. Fascinating. And so that with those, that's my background. And so I grew up with both fundamentalist and this other world. My mission president sent me to a lot of anti-Mormon areas because I could sit down and answer the scholarly questions for a lot of people. A lot of it wasn't hard; it was just reasoning, thinking through it and going through what they're doing. And so that's some of my history and some of my background. My father left me all of his books and his presses when he passed away and said, "You need to carry it on." There was a gentleman, Inby Lundwall, had actually told my father he needed to keep some of the old religion alive. And Inby Lundwall had a huge library and huge things that he tried to keep as much of the old religion as possible. And so that's what my dad said. Well, I'm passing the baton on to you to keep the old religion.
So you're the caretaker of the legacy of your father in many ways, and
Correct.
that's a really important thing in your life is to make sure that his legacy and his writings and his ideas are brought down to the next generation and continue forth. And it seems like you're doing a really good job making sure that his story continues to be told.
Yes. Yeah, we've compiled a kind of like an encyclopedia set. I don't know if you can see. There's
Mhm.
this set, a hardback and a paperback set. Over 5,000 pages,
Wow.
8.5 by 11 of information that is, my dad didn't like just say it one way. He would get different versions or different, ideas of what the people thought of, and then give all the references. And so his main point was to try and get information to people and then let them make up their mind.
I think I've seen those books at Benchmark Books. Is that correct? Do they
That's
carry
correct.
those? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So yeah, Benchmark Books, and of course you can check out their website for more of these publications. So I want you to tell us about the Dream Mine. Now, this is a really interesting story, and there's a lot of people right now, we're in the 21st century, and there's many people are speculating that we might be in the last days. And so that with that being the case, a lot of people believe that the Dream Mine is going to play a major role in the coming forth of a lot of things in the future. But before we talk about that, I want you to, Kevin, to tell us who was Bishop Coyle, what was the Dream Mine all about? And then talk about your father's role as being kind of like a very important person in this story.
So Hiram Coyle, he actually was one of the early pioneers that came across and then came to Utah. Um, and then his son uh, was also here and a pioneer in Spanish Fork. John Hiram Koyle, which was the man that started the Dream Mind. This is the book, by the way. If we can focus in on that, that's the actual Relief Mind book my father wrote.
Okay, and when did he write that book? And hold it up a little higher so they can see the pictures. That's the picture on the cover there. That's the actual Dream Mine right there. That exists to this day. And where is that the Dream Mine located at?
So the Dream Mine is located in Salem, Utah. It's just south of Provo, which is south of Salt Lake, and it's right up on top of a mountain or on a mountainside, and it's a beautiful place. You know, you go there and it has the trees and all the beauty and everything there. It historically, according to Coyle and others, this is a place where the Nephites were in this valley, and there was a lot of them, and there was a lot of different records that were brought into this mine. And as Bishop Coyle, it came into Bishop Coyle's hand or in his information about it. He was told not to go into the old entrance. It was probably like in the movies where there's trap doors and that kind of thing. And they said, don't go in that way. You'll have to go in the back way. And so on the other side of the mountain, he was digging a hole to get into the actual chambers that are inside that that area.
Now, when you say there were records in there, are we talking about Nephite records? And are we talking that is this a potential landing spot for the plates of the Book of Mormon?
Um, I believe that there were a lot of records that were placed there. Um, we know there's a whole lot of information that's all through these valleys, in Manti. I got up one time in the morning. We had a house in Manti, and I woke up and I said, Dad, where are you going? He got his camera all ready, and he used to take me all the time because I'd go help him set up his photography equipment. Oh, there's a guy that found a couple of mummies and plates
And
and
that's
this
the Brewer's Cave, correct?
Brewer's Cave. It was Johnny Brewer. He introduced me to Johnny. I didn't go that day, but he took pictures of all the plates and all the things, and Johnny was very interesting story, some of which never made it to the light of day. But those are records that were laid up, and there were things that were there. Those folklore stories go forever. I mean, the treasures of Utah. I've printed a lot of books for some of these treasure seekers and their legends and their stuff and the Native Americans and yeah, we could go for hours on the whole.
Yeah, and we've actually had, I think, Christopher Smith on to talk about the Brewer's Cave, and that's an interesting story. I first encountered the Brewer's Cave story in at the Lake County Public Library in Indiana, where there was a book by Paul R. Cheeseman, who wrote a book about the Brewer's Cave and talking about finding Jaredite mummies and plates. And so that's and I think they were redheaded, weren't they? Redheaded Jaredite mummies, and they were giants. And so that's a very interesting story. We can go on that tangent, but we want to stick on
Save
to
that,
the
yes.
onto the main topic. But of course, I could go up for hours talking about this kind of stuff too. But what was so interesting is actually I want to share this real quick with the folks since we are a book show. Is the very first time I actually encountered the story of the Dream Mine was in this book, Rocky Mountain Empire: The Latter-day Saints Today by Samuel W. Taylor. This book came out in the 1970s. And there's a chapter devoted to Bishop Coyle in this book, and I'll pull that up real quick. And so that was the first time yeah, so it's chapter 14, Bishop Coyle, the Angel, and the Dream Mine. And so that's the first time I encountered the story. And then later I would read the book Under the Banner of Heaven, which also talks about the Dream Mine as well. So those are the two books that were the first time I ever heard of it. And so it's always been a very fascinating story to read about. And again, this is within the context of the restoration, the idea that we would have angelic appearances, that we would have lost records coming forth. This is all anticipated within the scriptures of the restoration. So this is not outside. As a matter of fact, that's why what's so interesting to me, Kevin, is I went on social media and said I was going to be interviewing you and talking about the Dream Mine, and I heard back from Latter-day Saints like mainstream Utah Latter-day Saints who own shares in the Dream Mine. Like, yes, we own shares, and I know many people who do. So this is not something that's just fundamentalists that are doing it. No, it's everybody within the restoration has. There's many different people within the restoration that have bought stock in this mine. Now, okay, so here we go. Tell me, Kevin, Bishop Koyle, tell me the start of the story because you're saying like he was told not to dig in a certain place. Who told him not to dig in a certain place? Who revealed to him this mine in the first place?
Okay, so yeah, let's go back to that story. So first of all, let's just start at the very beginning. So Bishop Coyle, he was just a little farmer. He was doing his work. Uh, he really wasn't having that significant of revelations or things, and so he kind of pondered that. One day he was in church, and a speaker got up and said, if you're not having these, it's probably because you need to repent and you need to straighten up things with your fellow man. You might have hurt a neighbor, you might have offended God somehow. And so, you need to straighten your life up. And so Coyle really took that serious. He would go to all of his friends and say, did I offend you? How can I make it right? That kind of thing. Kind of got things all squared away and really started focusing. And then he had a couple of encounters, which are in the book. We won't go into too much detail, but basically, he made a promise to God and said, look, if this happens, or you'll do this for me, I'll do whatever you want me to do. I'll go where you want me to go. I'll say what you want me to say, type thing. And it happened. And so then two of the three Nephites came to him and said, there's this mountain here, and this is a sacred mountain, and it has all these records. And they started describing to him what he needed to do. And so he was guided by these messengers, or these two Nephite. When we talk about the three Nephites, that's two of the three.
So why were there only two of the three that came to him? Do they?
Apparently, the other third one had to do. He had more work to do with the actual church.
Okay.
So he was kind of busy over there doing that. These two were kind of in this domain.
Okay, so two of the three Nephites appeared to your dad and explained to him
Oh,
about
Bishop Coyle.
Bishop Quayle. I'm sorry, Bishop Quayle, and your dad is very much intimately tied to this. But uh, and so this is the beginning of the. So what happens next? Does he start digging, or does he start telling people about this vision? I mean, how is this message even received in the community?
Yeah, kind of all of the above. And then as he started telling and explaining, and you have to understand, somebody just having that kind of experience and then going and telling people is one thing. But Coyle was the kind of individual who he would tell you something one day and he'd say, okay, don't go drive down that road because there's going to be a bad experience if you do. And then they go and drive down the road and they have a bad experience.
Hmm.
So Coyle was prophetic all the time. My dad
Okay.
said constantly, every day, you'll see this, you'll do that. You need to not do this, or he saw things all the time. There was, for instance, there was a time when they shut down the Dream Mine, and he went out west into Nevada, and he was up at this mountain city. I've been there several times, and he was there working, and it was actually some of my cousins that ended up with the mine. But he was working in there, and he woke up one morning and he said, "I had a dream that just across the way, you brethren need to go over and you need to get that and lock up those minerals and claim it, get it all claimed up because it has one of the largest copper deposits of anywhere." And of course, what do people do? They do nothing. They didn't do anything. And then a certain company came by, and it was called Rio Tinto, and that was where Rio Tinto got its major strike of copper.
Hmm.
And so, why didn't they do it? I don't know. And so those are the kind of things. So what happened? So I'm trying to explain, why would people put their faith in Bishop Coyle is because they saw this consistently.
Okay. So he had a proven track record. And just so we know some dates here, right around what time period are we talking about when this whole idea of the dream mine first comes up?
It started kind of around the turn of the
Right.
century, and then it took off a little bit more. Uh, in fact, this when you look, this is called the mill. This big white building is called the mill, and
Okay.
they would bring the ore at the top, and then it would mill it and grind it and bring it down, and then they would process it down here. And so the mill was actually built during the Depression. And it's like, how did you even get the money for this? People didn't even have any money to buy cheese, and yet somehow people have donated and helped get that, going. So it was really starting to kind of come together um, around that era, the Depression, and just before World War II. Those were major times of the Dream Mine.
So what's revealed to him is that what was revealed to him that what was in the mine itself, in addition to like there being Nephite records, but there would also be other things. Explain to what was revealed to him.
Well, there was gold that was laid up. I'm assuming gold coins. There was Nephite coins. There was gold bars. There was all of that, but also it had a rich deposit in there. And some of the folklore stories around Dream Mine was that one guy like picked up a bunch of stuff when nobody was looking and had it assayed, and it was a huge amount, of gold inside of it. And so we know that there's pretty good gold up in that area. I mean, some of the largest mine in the world was Eureka, which we could go into a whole story of that. I mined out there for a while, and some of the maps showed millions and millions and millions of dollars that came out of Eureka.
Hmm.
Uh, One man felt there was more out of there that came out than Alaska or California.
Hmm.
So that was just down the road. It's probably a half hour away from the Dream Mine.
So then the idea was, what was the purpose of the dream mine and having all these riches stored up there? What that would serve a role in the end of days?
Yeah, very good point. So the purpose of the Dream Mine was at the very last days was to bring that out and to gather or buy up supplies, wheat. There's going to be a big storehouse, kind of like Joseph of Egypt, where they stored up a lot of wheat and goods and etc. Because there's going to be a repeat of that. There's 3.5 years of hardship. Bishop Koyle talked about 3.5 years. It starts to get built back up. That's the 7 year, loop that all the Bible and other things talk about. The mark of the beast, and all the things that would come, and
Okay, so
so
we're talking about like the 7 year tribulation. We're
right,
talking about the mark of the beast. We're talking about like a one world government, one world religion.
that's right,
Basically, true believers will be persecuted during this period of time, and they would need to go to places of refuge to flee during these end of day periods. And that the dream mine or the relief mine was going to basically be able to kind of stabilize the community that it maybe not suffer they would suffer, but maybe not as badly as other parts of the world. Would that be correct?
right. Yeah, that was to bring relief to the individuals that were here in the Rocky Mountains and to help out. And there's other mines as well. There,
Hmm.
uh, there were prophecies by Lorenzo Snow, about mines that would come out. There was prophecy, Orson Pratt, even he even said there would be types of mines like this or things that were stored up that would prove the Book of Mormon to be true. There'd be so many records and so many archives and so many things. And I could even go into a story of Arizona. I'll tell that one later, of a Native American Apache lady there that told me about stuff. So
Hmm.
there's all this stuff that's here. Um, some treasures have been found. I mean, it's quite interesting the things that have been brought up and people have accumulated wealth from in this local area.
And so, and just giving an example, like when you say treasures have been dug up, what just like,
Well, the Lost Dutchman mine was found. There's several other mines in this region that I know of that people don't talk about, but they found it and they did stuff with it
hmm,
and things. And so So we're seeing a lot of stuff coming out now. That,
So I want you to talk a little bit now about Bishop Koyle and what happened with him in regards to the church, and then also your father's relationship with Bishop Koyle. I think it's important that we have that story told.
okay, so let me tell how my dad kind of got connected with the Dream Mine. So my dad was a photographer. He was very young, but very good, and he had a way with children. He'd make them laugh. And he somehow ended up down in Texas. They hired him down there. There was a Jewish company, and he got into there and was just making him a fortune. He'd get up. My dad only slept 4 hours a night since he was a little kid, and he would wake up and they'd start him working at 7 in the morning. People would come in, get their pictures taken before they go to work. He'd work all day. They had all these people all kind of just bringing people through, and he just running these pictures all the time, and people come from all over the world basically to get their pictures taken down there in Texas. And this company was making a very very good amount of money, and my dad said, "Well, I want to leave. I want to go back to Utah. I have this impression I need to go." Well, we'll double your money. And so he doubled his money, and he actually spent a lot of that money later. He bought uh, an ore rig or something and a drilling rig, and there was some property there, and a guy was running, and they were running down trying to hit oil, and they got onto the capstone, and they was going through, and then it broke. The actual bit broke, and when the bit broke back in those days, that was the end. Done. And so then they sold it to another guy, and then he hit one of the largest oils in Texas.
Hmm.
So my dad could have been a billionaire. I mean, he really could have. So anyway, so none of that worked out, and finally he was telling these Jewish people about having to go back to, and they saw it as, oh, you're trying to go back to like the temple, like we. So you have a temple. Oh, okay. So you're going on a pilgrimage type thing, and so they let him go, and he finally came, and he got to Utah, and he couldn't find a job anywhere. Here, he'd made all this money, and he gets to Utah, and there's just no photography work. He's just really having a hard time, and he's getting discouraged, and he goes to see his cousin, and his cousin says, "Let's go see the Dream Mine." And so he comes down, and on the way, people are all, "Oh, you need some money, and here, I'll help you out." And you're going to work for Koyle? Well, yeah. And he didn't know who Koyle was. He didn't know anything about the Dream Mine or nothing. And they pull up, and he walks up to Bishop Koyle, and Bishop Koyle stretches his hand out and shakes his hand, and he says, "We've been waiting for you." And they didn't even have any spots or positions to work. And he says, "Nope, put him to work." So he knew my dad before he ever met him. He goes, "We've been waiting for you."
And how old was your dad at this time?
About 19, 20,
So he's a young man,
young
and
man.
so he makes his way back to Utah after working in Texas for a while. And next thing you know, he meets Bishop Koyle, and Bishop Koyle says, "We've been waiting for you." So talk about that adventure that your father would have had in the relationship that he had with the bishop.
So then at that point, he kind of became Bishop's right hand man. He did all the heavy labor that needed to be done. He helped change tires for Bishop. He was getting a little bit older. Bishop couldn't quite uh, read as well as he could, so Dad read a lot of stuff for him. Read out of the Journal of Discourses to him on the porch and that sort of stuff. And so he nicknamed my father Stonewall because my dad was a very stubborn German, and it was just that's just the way he was. And one time Dad found out all the stuff that the church kept changing. He was really upset. Well, I'm going to go straighten those people out. And and
And this
so
is interesting, Kevin, just real quick. Your father was actually a convert
correct,
to the
yes.
church. So he converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints he came from a German Lutheran background. And he converted around the age of 17, isn't that correct?
Yeah, 17, 18. Yeah.
And then so almost and then did he ever serve a mission or anything like that?
Yes, he has a whole journal. This is a fascinating part how he came to that because and this is kind of with the dream mind because he was there and it was kind of the very end and he turned to Bishop Koyle and he says, "You know, Bishop Koyle," he says, "I think I need to go on a mission." And Koyle looked real sad and he goes, "Well, maybe you do." And he says, "But I want to go the old way. I want to go without purse or script." And he says, "Really?" And Koyle looked up like he did, and he says, "Stonewall, I think you might just get that wish." And so he got out in the mission field. It was in Southern California and Arizona, Southern California, Southern States Mission. And it was Bruce R. McConkey's father, Oscar, who was the mission president. And he walked in, and one of the kids came out of the door, the office, and he said, "Oh no, President McConkey just had a revelation. We're going without purse or script." my my dad smiled and he's like, "Yeah." So the day he got in the mission, and then it was pretty close to the day that he left the mission 2 years later. Um, he actually they actually quit going without purse or script. So it was just kind of like for him, he said.
Hmm.
And so those 2 years, and BYU did a kind of an interesting interview with my dad on those 2 years and what happened. Very interesting.
So when you say they were operating without purse or script, what does that mean? What did that look like?
That means that you're just walking around and you live off the people, food, clothing, shelter, um, and if you're not living right, then you don't get anything.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, and that really was the how it was in the early days of the Restoration was a very similar thing. And it's fascinating that he has this impression that he's supposed to serve this way. And then during this period of time while he's serving the mission, that's like one of the few times where this little sliver of time in which that actually happens. It kind of fulfilled that prophecy or whatever you want to call it. Very interesting. So your father goes on his mission, then presumably he returns and he's back in the fold with Bishop Koyle. Maybe continue the story.
Oil passed away during that time.
Oh, he passed away during the mission. Okay, so let's okay. Thank you for giving me that. So let's talk a little bit. We'll backtrack a little bit because basically, Bishop Koyle ends up, from my understanding, he gets excommunicated from the church. Maybe talk about that story. What led to that?
So it was kind of an interesting one because there was one of the miners came up one day and he says, "Oh, my uncle or neighbor or something, Marky Peterson's going to be an apostle in the church, and so we'll have a friend with the dream mine." And Coyle sat there for a second and he goes, "No, Marky Peterson will be one of our greatest enemies." And they didn't expect that, but that prophecy came true. Marky Peterson put a lot of pressure on the dream mine. Talmage put a lot of pressure on the dream
And
mine.
just to understand with Mark E. Peterson, why did this person think that they would have a friend in the Dream Mine with Mark E. Peterson? Did he have a history with the Dream Mine?
Yeah, he had a little bit of history with the dream mine. Not a lot, but they some reason this gentleman felt like he would be an asset to them.
And turns out it was the opposite. Bishop Coyle said, no, actually, this will
Well,
be
he's going to
okay.
come around and betray us type thing.
And of course, you brought out Talmage as well. So maybe talk about the role that Talmage and Peterson played in ultimately Bishop Coyle being excommunicated.
Well, and Talmage, for some reason, Talmage did some mining and different things, and but Talmage got kind of like one time he was out there and there's this mound that's built up, so it's kind of like our highways here. It's got it's built up, and then there's the highways on top, and so when it rains, the water goes off the highways. And there is what they call a Nephite highway that goes all the way from Payson, and you can see it. It's all bermed up, and it goes all the way up to where the mine is. And so, he's flying in an airplane. I've flown over it, and there's just this weird contour that's been built up, and they call it the Nephite Highway. And so one time they were out there, and of course Bishop was giving some lectures and some talks, and Talmage came up and he says, "Well, let me tell you about how this really went, because I'm a geologist." And so he got up and he started telling, "Well, the waves from, the lake came up, and this is how this did this, and there was an old farmer standing there, and everybody's listening. He had his suspenders, and he went like this, and he goes, 'Well, Talmage, we understand how it got built up on this side, but how did it get built up on the other side?'" And he didn't have an answer for that. And everybody kind of laughed him to scorn. And then he got really mad. And so that's kind of the history of how Talmage, the experience that happened. So there was some mixing of blood there, because at the same time, you had J. Golden Kimball, who was Bishop Koyle's mission president. And Bishop Koyle had a dream, and he told the mission president, he said, "Jay Golden, don't go to this presentation tonight, because there's a big mob that's going to come, and they're going to try and kill you." And they were in the South, where they really did do a lot of that stuff. They really hurt a lot of people. And so Koyle said, "Well, maybe I'll just hang back." So they hung back, and then a mob came busting in and went running in, and they were looking for that redheaded J. Golden Kimball. Where is he? They wanted to find him and haul him off. And so that was, Jay Golden all of a sudden realized this kid, this missionary, had some real good inspiration, you know. And so that's where, and so Jay Golden had stock in the Dream Mine. And so you had people in the general authorities. There was a lot of them that had stock in the Dream Mine and believed in it and had experience with Bishop Koyle. And then you had some over here who didn't, but they just didn't like it for whatever reason.
Okay, so you have these different camps now. And
Yeah,
of course we see this is historically we see that there's often splits within even the quorum and there's with general authorities and you have
correct.
different segments and some are maybe more influential during periods of time than other times. And so what led to ultimately this group deciding to get Bishop Coyle excommunicated?
Well, there was one of the things that happened with Bishop Koyle was during the interview with the two Nephites. There was quite a long, lengthy time there, and they told Bishop Koyle, if you can ever get a time where you can talk to the general authorities, all the presidents of church and all the upper bay, um, it would be very profitable, and you can tell them this story. We don't even know what it ever was. He never told anybody. But he said, I wanted to get an audience with them, and I would do anything to get up there and be able to tell them my story that was never told. We don't even know what it was. Um, and so they made it kind of a tricky covenant with him. They said, "Well, we'll if you sign this statement, saying that the mine was, kind of not real, or that it wasn't as inspired or something, we'll get you an interview with the general authorities." And so the only reason why he signed that was it was more important for them to hear the story. And then they tricked him, and then they never got him the interviews or the things, and then they went and broadcasted that statement, which made it look like the mine was a hoax or whatever. And so yeah, it was kind of trickery on their part.
So he was tricked into signing this letter because
Right.
he and again this is the question too is like obviously this is a person who deals with prophetic stuff and warning people and stuff like that. Do you think he had an impression that this was a trick and he still went through it?
And that was one of the questions that Dad had, and Coyle was told never to sign anything, see, and never
Uh,
to write anything down. So he kind of made a mistake there.
so this is a case where maybe bishop was kind of disobedient to his calling, and then he was punished as a result in one sense.
He went through a real struggle at the end, and then his wife, I believe, she had passed away. She came back and she said, "Well, on the other side of the veil, we kind of understand these things, but because people make mistakes, we know that they do."
Huh. And so, and then how did your father react to when so did your father know that he signed this letter, or did he find out when it was announced? I mean, how did he respond to it?
Kind of when it was announced, and I remember my dad saying, "I knew something was up. Didn't feel right. Everybody felt like it was a trick, and then it turned out that it was a trick, and so it was kind of bad news." You have to understand, Marky Peterson chased down a lot of the old dream miners, and he was the one that he was responsible for excommunicating my father as well.
There's a lot of interesting stories I've heard about Marky Peterson and some of the stuff that he did that it also included with your parents as well. So yes, and I'm aware of those stories. And I think it's also talked a little bit about in Sandra Tanner's book. Out Lighthouse actually talks about some of those episodes as well. Um, so Bishop Koyle then gets excommunicated from the church. Now what are we to do with and so this must have been a major blow to the dream miners. Did it cause there to be a lot of people to maybe lose their trust in the bishop, lose their
Kind
trust
of
in the dream mine? Maybe talk
right.
about the aftermath.
But that was kind of the end, and it seemed like most of the people at that point had kind of, they either went one way or the other. They knew that Coyle had gotten tricked, or they just gave up on the mine altogether. And very old, and that was kind of the end.
Okay, so so basically you had people that stayed true to the mine, and but also a lot of people that left and decided this was not real or anything like that. So now here you have this situation where you have this person signing off on something saying this is not true, but then he's also then says that he was tricked. This causes obviously a lot of things in the community, but yet the dream mine is still here, and there are still people to this day in 2024 that believe in the dream mine and are still buying stock in the dream mine. What caused this thing to not see a lot for a lot of people that would have been the death knell, but it wasn't.
Well, the whole prophecy about the mine was that it wasn't going to come out until there was the next depression, and that we're waiting for. That has not happened, and so in fulfillment of that prophecy, we are waiting and anticipating for that day, and when that Great Depression hits again, and it'll make this other one look like a summer's picnic. It's going to be a real hard hit for all the people. We're going
And
to
there's
really,
a lot of people are anticipating that we even are entering into that period of time. If you look at gold and silver right now is at a record high right
those
now.
are those are some of the prophecies. See, and that's what Dad was saying all the time I was growing up. He says, "Oh my heck, there's another prophecy that Coyle said, and now it just happened." There was one where he said that there would be water flowing through Salt Lake City like rivers. And Dad always thought, "What? That's just goofy." And that never happened or anything. And then one year we had these
Yeah.
huge floods,
I think
and
wasn't it like 1983, I think
yeah,
was
and there was just tons of water coming down, and they built up sandbags, and it was just like a big river going right through Salt Lake. There were people out there fishing and catching fish in that river as it went through Salt Lake.
yeah,
And
and
so,
for many people that was a prophecy that was fulfilled.
correct.
Okay. So, and again, I guess if anything, if you have a prophet, and one of the ways to test a prophet is to see if their prophecies come true or not. And so your father was a witness to these prophecies and was able to verify some of these coming forth. Is that correct?
Right. So one of the massive ones was the very first depression.
Mhm.
Oil prophesied to the very day when that depression would happen.
Oh, wow.
And my dad was out. Jean Dixon, she was the the crystal ball lady
Yeah,
for
psychic. Yeah, yeah.
all that and everything. In fact, I saw a book of hers that she signed for Dad, and Jean was back east, and my dad went back east for the government, and he went and met her, and she told him all about himself. It was really fascinating, and he says, "Boy, she hit me right on. It was really major." And and then Dad told her a little bit about Bishop Koyle, and he said, he prophesied to the very day when the depression would happen. And she stopped and she looked and she said, "Oh my heavens, nobody hits a day. Not even the best." She said, "That man was a prophet of God." Gene Dixon said, "That man was a prophet of God." And so
Interesting.
he prophesied that. They came to him one time and said, the president of the church said, "If you give up this polygamy stuff down in Mexico, the next temple that will be
Yeah.
built in Mexico."
Hmm.
Well, then Coyle got a hold of that and he goes, "No, that's not what I saw. I saw the people running out of there with just backpacks on their
Yep.
back.
I was going to ask you about that. That was, yeah. And
Oh,
so,
Pancho Villa, throwing them all out. And my great grandfather was there, rattling the chains and helping everybody get out of there.
yeah.
Pancho Villa was a good man. He actually, the story in Mormonism goes that he didn't have any problems with the Mormon people. He loved them. And at the very last, they cleared out all the city, all the area, and got him up into Arizona. And then there was one little old lady sitting on a porch, sitting in a rocking chair. And he goes, "What are you doing here?" "Well, I'm going to die anyway. I might as well just die here." And he says, "Not on my shift, you aren't." And so he ordered his wagon over, and they picked him up, kind of like Granny and the Hillbillies, and threw her up on the wagon in her chair and hauled her off, got her up to Arizona. He wasn't going to have that. So,
Then you talking about Pancho Villa did this?
yeah,
Interesting.
very own.
Wow. So, and of course, you have so many interesting stories, Kevin. When I first met you a few years ago, you told me just so many fascinating stories, and we're going to have you back to talk about those. But I want to kind of just talk about the legacy of the Dream Mine. So, people still have the vision for it. They kept it alive. They kept it going. Just talk about the history of the Dream Mine post Bishop Coyle and the role that your father played in it.
So yeah, so a lot of the people, one of the things Dad did was by writing the books and trying to get together the histories of it so people understood it. They'd understand the good side to it because there is a good side. The prophecy is that the mine will come out, that gold will be brought out, and it will be a way for people to make and work at the mine and provide for their families during this really really hard depression coming. And the mine would be all encompassing. Hoyle said it would be involved in banking, and it would be involved in groceries, and it would be involved in clothing and everything. It would be one of those all-encompassing, helping people in all of those ways.
So it'll be a self-sufficient community that would basically go through weather the storm and not be dependent on anything on the outside.
Exactly. And that, for most of the people that are into the bug out program and getting ready for the hard times, that's what they're looking for. They're seeking a group of people who will be able to gather together and help each other because they know alone you're just nothing. But if you can get three or four families and you can work together and grow gardens and do all this, which by the way, some of the soil that comes out of the Dream Mine, they use that for fertilizer and it's growing some of the greatest crops ever.
Hmm.
So yeah,
Yeah, I
there's
know
some
somebody who buys peaches in the orchard out there, so I know.
beautiful beaches. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So
Got its
this,
own water supply that comes out of the mountains, so it's got its own water.
huh. So, interesting. And I'm still learning so much more about this. And one of my dreams is to one day make my way out there and go see the Dream Mine. And maybe one day. Now, this is the thing that, from my understanding, it's actually not currently open to the public. Maybe explain the status of the mine right now.
Well, as a mine that's shut down, they got to be real careful. They can't have people, going up and falling and slipping, and they certainly don't want people down inside the mine because that particular mine has to have air pumped into it. I've been in several other mines that, oddly enough, there's some air that blows through it, and some of the histories that are involved in that are very fascinating. So yeah, and so it's just they have to be careful because the liabilities and the other things that are involved in it right now. But they are trying to upkeep it, keep things going, rebuild some of the bad, broken down things they're trying to look at doing.
Now, how do you respond to maybe the detractors out there who say, well, this was all made up, or nothing's come out of this mine. This is just a pipe dream. Maybe just talk about some of and these would be critics that would be in many cases Latter-day Saints that don't find this to be a compelling story or think that it's all just made up. What do you have to say to those people?
I know personally several stories where they have gotten some of the tailings. They have worked some of the areas in the local area. I'm a miner myself. I've gone out and prospected, and there's just these mountains are just full of gold. I mean, American Fort Canyon, they shut that down to mining because so many people were finding good nuggets and good things there. And that's just north of this. And so a lot of mines are in the area. And so why wouldn't there be gold in an area that there's already gold and has tons of it? I mean, just over on the other side of the valley, over in Eureka, the greatest gold mines in the world. I mean, the rich dad, poor dad, that guy was sitting in a mine not long ago saying this is the largest and best mine ever in the world, and that was in Eureka. And it was producing some pretty high ore, and then I think the Lord just shut some of these mines down. And then all of a sudden, it just didn't have anything, you know. And so it's in a good area. You can't argue that. There's lots of good gold around that area. You just can't argue that. A lot of people that are behind the scenes have gotten gold out of there. So we know that there's no doubt that there's gold in that region or in that area.
Okay, so now what's interesting to me is like Bishop Coyle was told to go through the back, not go through like the front entrance. And then you talk about this Nephite highway. It seems to imply that the Nephites were pretty sophisticated in their technology to one, dig a mine, build a highway. Maybe speak to that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there was a lot of real high tech stuff going on that we we don't even know. I mean, some of the histories of the world, you go back and look, and they were highly advanced, even the Mayans and others, and so this civilization was the same. And according to the two Nephites, they stored this up because they had prophecy that things would get really bad on that second depression, and that's why they put the gold there to help people.
Interesting.
Brigham
Yeah.
Young stood right down here near Santaquin, and he pointed up at the mountain near here, and he said, "That mountain has more gold in it than anywhere in the world, and its main purpose of that will be in the last days to help with the gathering of Israel, to bringing people to refuge to the Rocky Mountains."
And you said Brigham Young said that?
Mhm.
Brigham Young. Okay. Wow, interesting. Well, I have to say, Kevin, first of all, I want to thank you so much for taking your time today to come on and give us an oral history of the Dream Mine. And I'd love to hear what people's comments are. I've heard back from people already say, yeah, I own shares. I know many people who own shares in it. One day I'd like to maybe buy a share or two myself in the mine. I think that'd be really cool. Kevin, was there anything else that you wanted to add to this story before we wind things down?
Well, one of the major things about the dream mine is the fact that the individual who saw it, and and there were many other people that had dreams or visions about it before they ever saw it. Abraham Gileadi, he he was driving by and had this impression to go there and asked to stay there and live there while he translated the Book of Mormon and did other stuff, into Hebrew. And so he actually lived there for a while. So there's all these people who have these dreams or associations or some reasoning behind it. And so it still has that glow. It still has that awesome story behind
And it is, whether you are a skeptic or a believer, it's an important story to tell. And it's fascinating. And for those of you who are interested in oral histories or folklore or all these kind of things, I think this was an important conversation that we had today. And I hopefully the beginning of a series of conversations, Kevin, because you have so many stories that you want to tell. And we just scratched the surface today. And I just want to thank you so much. And again, I'm going to go and just share with the screen here for everybody. Make sure I get this right here. There we go. So we have Kevin Kraut's YouTube channel. We have his website, Old Pioneer Press, in which Kevin, hold up that book again. Can they buy that book
it.
in
Yep.
on this website? And what's the name of the book?
This is called The Relief Line, and it was written by my father, and it's only $10. We've kept it the same price for years.
Oh, for $10. And then we also have the ogdenkraut.com.
And
So
you
you
can
can
read the
all
book
things Ogden
for
Kraut. And
free.
I've Ensign to the Nations, I've seen that book. I'd love to get a copy of that one day. And so yeah, so here we are. This is a very interesting story. I want to also tell people at the end card here, I will post up the interview that I did with Ann Wild, who is the widow of Ogden, your father, and she's a wonderful person. I'm so glad to have made her acquaintance, and I want to thank actually my friend Allison Biggers for helping set up that interview a couple years ago, and it's probably the last interview she'll ever give, and it was really great. So I really find your father, Kevin, to be a very interesting guy. I'd like for you to come back to maybe talk more about the history of just talk about your dad, what kind of person he was. I've already had that conversation with Ann, but I'd like to hear what the son's perspective is. I'd love to hear some of your three Nephite stories that you've told me, some of your experiences with Ezra Taft Benson. I mean, with Hugh Nibley. I mean, there's just so many things to talk about. And of course, you've talked about some of that on your YouTube channel. And I want to encourage people to check out some of those interviews and those videos. It's really a fascinating story. And I probably feel like I've known you for over 10 years when you first went on Don Quixote. Kevin Kraut, thank you so much for coming on the program today.
You bet. Glad to.
And this was great. And folks, leave your comments. Love to hear what you have to say about this. Also, in the description, for those of you who would like to financially support the channel, we do have links to our merch store, MormonBookReviews.com, as well as Patreon, PayPal, and Venmo. And I want to thank all those of you who are financially supporting the channel. Couldn't do it without you. But remember, the most important thing is this: all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.